Hi there, I'm Steve Knutson. I'm a Microsoft MVP based in Christchurch, New Zealand, and I'm here as part of the M365 for May to talk about a project I did with an organisation called Monarchy. And what I'll do through this presentation is really talk about the why we did the project, what the challenges were with the project, a bit about the technology parts to it, and quite a few learnings along the way and some successes as well. So hopefully, can you see my slides now?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, great. So just to start off, before we begin, I'll just start with the code of conduct. So if you've attended the event already, you'll be familiar with the code of conduct, but if you haven't, if you just have a quick read, basically what we're trying to do here is create a harassment-free event where people feel safe to ask questions and so on. So just have a quick read of that. You would have also seen this online. And then we'll just jump across to the next slide here. We'd just like to make some acknowledgements to the traditional owners of the land. So this is for the Aboriginal elders in Australia. And I'd like to extend this also to New Zealand, to our tangata whenua organisations, our people, our whānau that, from New Zealand, and hopefully include them in the event. So I'll start with a little bit of an introduction about myself. So as I mentioned at the beginning, I'm a Microsoft MVP based in Christchurch. I'm a technology consultant by profession. I'm the managing director of a company called Stratus Technology Partners, who are a digital cloud-first technology company based in Christchurch. We do software development in SharePoint, Teams, and wider Office 365 type projects. In my spare time, I'm an amateur kayaker and amateur photographer. Although I've just made the top 10 worldwide contributors to unsplash.com. Great place to go and get your stock photos. There's my Twitter handle, NZ Tech Tweet. I've got a blog, and I've got an email address there that you're welcome to contact me on if you've got any questions after the event or during the event. So I'll start off with a little bit and talk a bit about Monarchy and what this means. So Monarchy is a Maori or te reo term meaning stronger for tomorrow. Monarchy is an organisation set up in Christchurch, and it has sort of two core principles really around supporting children and their families around mental health and well-being, and also providing guidance and support for their parents, for teachers, and for the wider whānau. So the focus really is about looking after yourself as a parent, supporting your child's well-being, and then working on positive family relationships in the wider family. So those are the three main areas that's focused on, although you'll see as we go through there are a few other areas as well. The organisations which actually make up Monarchy are on the screen here at the moment. There's 13 non-government organisations. These service the wider Canterbury region. So this is from Kaikoura in the north and then down past Timaru in the south. Organisations that provide social services to different to people in need, and also but through this particular program delivered through schools. So part of the challenge of this project was working with all of these different organisations, all with their own constraints and problems, to bring them together into a single parent organisation, or Monarchy. A few little messages, I guess, from Monarchy. So this is actually off their website. This is the feedback that they get from the people that they work with. So you can see the types of feedback that they're a very valued organisation. They have a diverse range of people that they're working with, but really what they're there to be is a helping hand. Now, for those of you that don't or aren't from New Zealand, you may not have heard of some of the language that I'm going to use during this talk. So I'm going to use three words reasonably frequently. Kaimahi, that means leadership. Tamariki, which means children. And whānau, which means family or extended family. So those are the three groups of people that we're really interacting with a lot in this organisation. So the Kaimahi are the leadership team or the leaders from within the Monarchy organisation. The Tamariki are the children that they're working with, and the whānau are their families and extended families. Some of the things that Manutaki do is they produce resources. So these are resources which can be used by teachers in schools to working with children. They can be used by parents. Some resources are downloadable off their website for the general public. They've also got videos and other bits and pieces on there as well. And really it's a platform for delivering useful community resources for a wide range of people. As a bit of a background of the project, so we've got 13 non-government organisations. We've got around 150 staff from those organisations that are working together in different ways. So they might form a small group or a committee. That group will work together to deliver a piece of work and may be made up of several people from several different organisations within the wider group to deliver a particular piece of work. So it might be a focus, for example, on mental health for children who have got some sort of disability in the family, or if there's been some sort of crisis that's occurred for a particular type, and they produce those resources. They cover across the wider Canterbury region, so it's a big region. Canterbury itself is a couple of hours drive north from here to the top of the region, and a couple of hours drive south to the south of the region. We have around more than 500,000 people, but scattered in both large urban areas and also smaller rural communities. The project itself has been led by the Canterbury District Health Board. They're our local health provider or organisation. Most people know them for the hospital, but also wider health outcomes in the community. The project itself also had a very low budget. So we were looking at an organisation which was wanting to spend its funds on supporting children and not on expensive IT consultants. So one of the real challenges for this type of project is thinking smart, thinking about how you can deliver things, and then getting resourceful on how you create things to maximise the value that you're delivering. And we were supported by an organisation called the Spark Foundation. So the Spark Foundation is a New Zealand telco. They have funding for certain types of community activities. We were able to get funding for part of this project. So part of the project itself was funded through the Spark Foundation, for which we're all very grateful. And then some of it through the Canterbury District Health Board. But you'll see there's some internal costs as well. So the objectives of this project, really four main objectives. The first one, improve collaboration. So by that we mean improving the way we're working between these 13 different little organisations that are trying to work as one larger one. They didn't have any common platform. They've all got their own networks, their own local IT provider, file servers, Dropbox, Google Docs, Office 365 if you're lucky, all of these different systems, and they're trying to find a single place that they can work together. And one of the real benefits that they're looking to gain there was around building joint resources. So rather than duplicating effort and all creating the same types of resources for teachers, creating one and knowing that that's created and being able to find it. So basic document collaboration is a really big win for these guys if we could deliver it. The second thing was providing access. So once the document is developed, they want to make sure that the correct version of that document is being used by as many people as possible, is easily accessible and understood, but also that it's approved. So they're making sure that they're getting an approved document that's being used and not one that's perhaps been taken off the internet, modified, and doesn't quite meet the message that's trying to be delivered. And that also means making that content discoverable. Another part of the delivery was around the development of shared resources. So outside the technology part, actually working together to build some of those shared resources. Some existed, some didn't. And so we're trying to build their capability to build this stuff together. And finally, building knowledge sharing. So being able to share ideas. And we had a real highlight of this come out when we did the training, which I'll get to later in the talk. But really it came down to understanding who else was in the organisation, what they could bring to the table, and what their life experience was. And so we discovered this through our training exercise. And then it was a really good example of how once you get people connected, the right people connected and talking about the right topics, they can deliver some really great outcomes. The project has content and collaboration challenges, lots of content and collaboration challenges, a few of them on the screen here. So they were using Dropbox extensively for shared resources, but as a health provider organisation, this isn't really meeting compliance requirements, particularly around the opportunity to accidentally share something that may contain patient identifiable information or contact details and so on. And In New Zealand, over the last few years, as I'm sure there are in other countries, we've had the odd incident where privacy breaches have occurred simply through people not sharing things well. So we wanted to make sure that that issue was dealt with. We also have an issue with being able to ensure that once a person leaves the organisation, that they no longer have access. It wasn't really well maintained. We had enormous amounts of sharing via email attachments, and we're talking large PDF file, brochure type documents and so on being shared around, comments being commented on, trying to collate those finished documents. Again, another real classic document management challenge, but nonetheless one which was pretty severe and extensive in this particular environment. They wanted to also make sure that the master documents were not so the challenge was master documents were not accessible to those that needed access to them. And so we wanted to make it so that the people that need to be able to update content can, and those that don't can't. So again, basic document security and so on for that. Another issue that we have was inconsistent cross-organisation collaboration. So there was some collaboration going on. It was going on very well between some parts of the organisation, but not so well in others. And so what we're looking to do is bring up some best practices and have them working really well across the board, across all of the different areas here. And then finally, we had a considerable duplication of effort. So if you think about these small organisations, they're very lowly resourced, so they only have small numbers of staff available. They're tight for time. They need to spend that time focusing on delivering outcomes to the children or tamariki, but not spending it sitting in the office trying to create resources that somebody else has already created. So a lot of work and duplication of effort was occurring, and this was something that we could see as another major win. So I'll talk a wee bit now about actually the implementation of this project. So across the organisation, we had 150 people. Those 150 people interact with each other in lots of different and complex ways, which led to the use of a great big Excel spreadsheet. Now, this spreadsheet was a monster matrix of people, the different activities or teams that those people worked with or committees they were involved in, working groups and so on. And the idea was to identify those, build a gigantic matrix, and that would become our source of truth for building out an automated build of teams and adding people to those teams. So we identified broadly three types of teams: global shared resources. So those are resources that would be used by anyone who was a member of the Monarchy organisation. Working groups across non-government organisations. So a working group contains members from more than one of the other member organisations, and those member organisations, and they needed a way to share documents together. And then finally, NGO-specific teams. So this is for each of the specific teams, they would have their own working area as well. Now, I need to talk a wee bit about that because we had a challenge. The challenge was some organisations, well, in fact, all of the organisations already had their own environment of some sort. So what we were providing them here with for the last type of team was an area where they could work together, but only within their own unique team, within their own organisation's team. And that's an area that we weren't sure whether they would take off or not, but we built it anyway, and it turns out that it had reasonable uptake. So now we have the people that actually are involved. So we have 4 administrators. So those administrators are users in the Office 365 tenant. So these are licensed users. They have an Office 365 license assigned to their account. And the other 150 people, they're all guests. And you can start to see that this is going to start bringing about some interesting challenges. So those 150 users, we needed to onboard those into the organisation, which we'll talk about shortly. But we also had some other specific requirements. We wanted to give them multi-factor authentication. We wanted to give them self-service password reset for the administrators, and a few other things. And so we started looking down the path of Azure Active Directory, and we implemented the B2B licensing, or Premium 1 licensing for Azure Active Directory, which gives you a 5-to-1 ratio of guest users to live users. And we'll talk a wee bit about licensing later, but basically that 5-to-1 ratio kind of was one of the key things around the licensing model that we used and some decisions that we made around the people using the site, or who would be using the site. So licensing itself is something that is not easy in Office 365, especially as you start getting into some complex scenarios. Basic scenario, quite straightforward, but when you get to complex scenarios, a little trickier. So as I was mentioning before, the four administrators all had an Office 365 E3 license. Those people are all members also of the Canterbury District Health Board, and that their role as dedicated administrators to the Monarchy project. And so their job was around configuration and management of the environment, more than creation of content. Then we had our Azure AD business-to-business licensing with our 5:1 guest ratio. So we needed to buy 30 of those to support our 150 user licenses. And then behind the scenes, we had to set up a process, because if you can imagine, we've got people onboarding and offboarding over time. So we have a process for managing the onboarding and offboarding of users. Now this Azure licensing thing itself turned out to be quite tricky, because it's not clearly stated anywhere in the Microsoft documentation, unless you find this little document on the right hand side here, which has a licensing guide. That licensing guide basically lays out the requirements for the guest 5:1 ratio, and that's where we sort of left off from. And we can't talk about licensing for NGOs without talking about TechSoup. So TechSoup provides charitable licensing to organisations that are registered charities in New Zealand, and there's also international versions of TechSoup as well. Through TechSoup, we're able to get some Office 365 licensing and other things which were useful through this project. Now, if you are an NGO, I'd highly recommend having a look at the TechSoup website and see what you're entitled to, what options are available there. You may be able to get some very good licensing deals or donations. So once we had our licensing in place, we did some initial prep work to set the tenancy up. So we configured the tenancy before we started inviting people in. And then we started making a plan. And our plan was really how we're going to onboard our people from our massive Excel spreadsheet. So what we used the spreadsheet for was we started mapping out team names, who was going to be the members of those teams, who were going to be the owners of those teams. Sorry, by members, I mean guests in this scenario, who were going to be the guests that we were going to invite in. Then we collated the email addresses for all of the different people from these different organisations. So that's no small undertaking. 150 people from 13 different organisations to get, and their roles. Then we built some PowerShell scripts, and these PowerShell scripts were to create the teams, and then additional PowerShell scripts to invite the guest users in and send the invites out to them. So that was our technique. Basically, take the Excel spreadsheet, create the teams that the people were going to be in the team, the teams that we needed. So our 58 teams that we'd identified, we created, and then run a massive PowerShell script to send out lots of invites. Now, what we found was on average, a person would be a member of 6 teams. So we had 150 people times 6. That gives you the number of guest access licenses, guest invites that we were generating through this process, about 900. So which PowerShell commands were we using? You're probably asking yourself right now. Well, we started off with the new team PowerShell. New team basically allows you to create a new team, assign an owner, and configure settings. It gives you quite a lot of configurability around the team and around what role or what people can do. Even things like whether you want to enable or disable animated GIFs, for example, can all be done with the team's command line. The most important thing for us was the team name, its description, and making sure that they're all private. So every team we created was a private team. We didn't want to, we didn't have any requirement for creating public teams or organisation teams. So basically, our main focus here: create the team, add the default user to the team, and then configure the settings related to that team. So we ran that, and we sent out a large number of invites with our test group, and then we realised we'd made a couple of mistakes. So we adjusted our approach slightly, and went back and repeated the process, fixing up those that we'd done. So the key thing here, I think, if you're running a large PowerShell script, is do a small pilot group first before you run the whole lot. Fortunately, we did that. We thought ahead. You've got to think about what happens if your scripts go wrong, and when they're doing them at scale, it's even more important to do. The other thing that we're looking at here is the bulk invite feature. So this you can also, if you're wanting to invite bulk guests into your Active Directory, you can use the bulk an import process now to bulk import from a CSV file. So you can through the Azure portal download a template CSV file, populate the data into that CSV file, and then upload it to generate all your guest users into your tenant. So that's quite a useful tool. This wasn't actually the way we did it. We did it entirely through PowerShell, but I just wanted to show that there's also a way of doing this without writing PowerShell if you aren't so inclined. The PowerShell command that you use also here for sending the invites is the new Azure AD MS invitation PowerShell script, and you can customize the template email that goes out with that as well. So you can customize the messaging around that email template. There's an article also in this bulk upload tutorial which talks about the format that you need to do to create that template. So I might just do a quick pause now, and for anybody that's still with us and still awake, we've got a competition happening. If you want to scan that QR code, I'll give you a few seconds to do that. Then you'll go in the weekly prize draw for the week 2 prize. Which I don't actually know what the prize is, but hopefully it's something good. I'm sure it is.
It will be, Steve. It will be some cool tech from one of our sponsors. And for anyone who maybe hasn't had a chance right now, you can also watch the recording to scan later. Thank you, Steve.
Fantastic. I didn't scan it myself, so I won't jump this shark.
Actually, on that one. And sorry to interrupt, but while you're paused, we do have a question.
Oh, far away.
What were some of the problems you discovered when you did the pilot?
So when we did our pilot, we had one really good problem, or difficult problem. So by good I mean you can't solve it straight away. So that problem was we had users that in their own organisations had also just onboarded to Office 365. So as part of the project, we were educating the NGOs that were associated with this project about Office 365 themselves, and so they all had some of them had independent Office 365 implementations going on. And what we found was that when we send the invite out, if they had an Office 365 account but they hadn't actually signed in yet, the invitations wouldn't work. So we had to go back and basically get them to log in. So they wouldn't. They had lots of login issues around that. So the solution was making sure that person had actually signed into their parent tenant before trying to accept the guest invite, because they were still getting the guest invite in their mailbox in some cases. So they would have email coming through their local computer. The other challenge that we had a wee bit was just getting settings right. So making sure that when we were trying to do things in a way that was efficient, so we didn't want to have to go through and do lots of manual changes to Teams afterwards. So we would go through a process a few times of building a team with a script and configuring it, and then checking to make sure it met all the requirements, only to find that we'd missed something, so we'd have to go back again. So definitely it's worth spending that little bit of time up front, because it saves you a lot of time on the longer term. I'll carry on. Yeah. Okay, so this slide here, you can actually see a little bit of what we did in Teams. So on that little screenshot here, we've got some of the teams that we created, and you'll notice the first one that we put at the top of everyone's is help with using Teams. So what we did was we had a requirement to ensure that the people that were using this environment were completely self-sufficient at the end of it. They didn't have the luxury of a budget for an ongoing support agreement. They didn't have a competent internal IT person that could sit there and answer all their help desk questions. They were really almost on their own. So what we wanted to do through the project was build a bunch of training resources for those people, and so that they could self-help, and so that they could onboard new people later themselves, and be familiar with the environment. So when what we did there was we created a help team, and I'll talk a wee bit about help a little later on and what happened with that. But it was quite a little interesting exercise. You'll also see that we've got a team called Program Team. The program team is the team that delivers the Monarchy program across the organisation. So that's an example of an organisation-wide team. And we've also got the Tama team, which I've opened the story, which is was focused on just one group. And then the Kaimahi resources. So if you remember, Kaimahi means leadership. So leadership resources. And in here is one of our main document repositories. So what we did was we actually used Teams and channels. We didn't go away and create lots of additional document libraries and so on, because we simply didn't have the need. We felt that what we were trying to build was something that was very easy for end users. And myself as a SharePoint consultant, I would have loved to have jumped in there and set up lots of complex metadata, content types and bits and pieces. But actually, for the specific need that these people had, it was really just a place to stick my documents. And the total numbers of documents across the entire platform at the time, we're talking less than 2,000. So small scale in terms of number of documents, but nonetheless, those documents are very important. So what we have here is we've got some example channels. So obviously the general channel exists in every team, but in this one here we had core documents for the organisation. We had group intervention related documents. So group intervention is where people are working together and are working with a large group of people. Individual interventions, when I'm working one-on-one with someone as a social worker, for example. And then another area for procedures and guidelines. Now, what we found through this too was that one of the challenges is actually identifying the right documents to put in there. So there was a whole team of people in the background checking documents and making sure that the right content was uploaded. Because if you think back to the beginning of my talk, lots of stuff was being shared by email. It was in Dropbox, it was in Google Drive, it was in other SharePoint environments all over the show. So what we're trying to do here is bring this content together into a single place. Again, the types of teams we had, just to recap, global teams, program-related teams, and organisation-related teams. And then we also had one for our implementation team as well, because when we're building the project, we should use teams to collaborate with each other. We were also distributed as well. So I'll talk a little bit more about the help team. The help team was, this idea came from one of the people in our project. They said, wouldn't it be great if we had somewhere where we could post a question and get an answer? We thought, well, that sounds like a conversation in a channel. And then we thought about it, well, there's other things that people would like to have as well in terms of help resources. So we started making some resources. One of the things that we built was a bunch of training videos. So these are very short videos, less than 5 minutes long, and they take you through a very specific activity. Now, what you're going to start seeing is that we had a pattern for how we were building our material and what we were encouraging people to do, but equally what we were not telling them about. So what our focus was, making sure that we could bring the lowest common denominators up to the same level so that people could collaborate. Because if you leave people behind, you're going to get stuck. It's not going to work very well. So we set up this environment, and actually one of the first questions that came in was a bit of a curly one, which was, how do I set my notifications up on my Android phone? Now, I'm an Apple iPhone user. I've never actually owned an Android phone. Don't hold that against me, but it was a bit of a challenge because being a non-Android user and not having one in front of me, I was trying to work out how to do it. So we posted a question into the channel, and lo and behold, somebody who was actually an Android user came up with the answer. They posted their result as a reply to the channel announcement, and then that gave a resource that everyone in the organisation could use for Android phones, and there were lots of them. So as people were coming in, we actually used that comment as an example to bring people into the fold of how we wanted them to work and how we wanted them to build their own self-help resources, helping each other, not reaching out for help outside the organisation. So it was a really important part of what we were doing. We also gave them a way to contact the champion, and we gave them access to the training guides that we developed for the training itself. So I'm going to go through what we did with training, but as part of that, we basically produced a set of training guides that matched some of the videos that we produced, and those training guides we actually presented one-on-one with them through a training day. So before we get into that though, sorry?
Quick question that's come up, if that's okay.
Yes.
Did you use PowerShell to create the users in order to get more control over the names assigned to users? Yes,
we did. Yeah. So we had some fun with names with users, because when they came through as guests, we got given all kinds of stuff. Our data in our spreadsheet wasn't great. So there was a few challenges with tidying that up, and PowerShell in the end was the way we did it. I think if there was one thing that we would do a bit more of, it would be making sure that that master list of information you're working from at the start was consistent, so that we had names in the consistent format and so on. That piece of work is really important, and it's something that we probably would have been better to have spent a little more time up front on, I think. So a few challenges that we had with this project. We had end users working in organisations that are short on cash. These organisations struggle for resource, and as I was saying, they'd rather spend the money on supporting the tamariki, the children that they're working with, and their whānau, than on fancy laptops. So what that meant was people with old gear. We also had some with Android tablets, we had some with iPads, and we had some with old versions of Windows as well. So we had no control over that hardware. So we could make a recommendation, but we couldn't actually dictate to them and go, you need to go and buy something new. That's simply not practical for these types of organisations. We also had users with extremely low IT literacy. And one of the interesting things that we noticed was that in these organisations, there's actually a generation gap. And the generation gap that I observed was probably the 35 to 50 age group. There are lots of people that work as social workers that are, say, under 35, and there's also a whole lot that are over 50, but there's not that many in the middle. And what we noticed was the older group, that 50 plus group, really had very poor, in many cases, very poor IT literacy. And so again, one of the reasons why we're trying to make a very simple solution was we needed these people to be self-sufficient. They simply don't have the time or the attitude to try and figure things out for themselves. They just want to go there and find it. Extremely tight budget again. Can't stress that enough. We're trying to do this on a smell of an oily rag. And there's a big group of people from 13 organisations to train. So we had to train 150 people from 13 different organisations, and get them all up to speed into a common understanding very quickly. We needed to just keep the operating costs of the solution as low as possible as well. What the Monarchy organisation can't afford is ongoing operating costs that are any more than the absolute minimum. So we're trying to build this solution so that it didn't need maintenance. We had some onboarding challenges. I think this is one of the questions that came up before too. So, end users simply weren't confident with technology. So we're trying to talk with people on a phone. We didn't have the ability to remote to their machine to see what they were seeing. So we're trying to guess our way through some of those types of problems. We were seeing problems that we hadn't seen before, simply because it was the first time we worked extensively with guest users. And there's some individual interesting challenges with that. We had users that hadn't logged into their organisation's tenants and so therefore couldn't access Teams. We had people that couldn't understand the difference between their organisation's tenancy and the Monarchy tenancy that they were a guest in. So that was a very foreign concept for a lot of people. We relied on the member organisation's IT support or IT provider. That was sometimes very good, sometimes a little more challenging. But in most cases, we actually got there. We needed to bring them up to speed as well, because for a lot of them, it was learning. And the implementation team was still learning. So we were doing this quite quickly. We were still learning some of the limitations about guests. And I'd say as an IT professional, I'd spent most of my time working in a tenant where I'm actually a member or the owner in most cases, and not really seen it from the position of a guest. And so I actually had to force myself to work as a guest for a while, just to sort of get to grips with some of the actual practicalities of doing so. So our guest users had a few limitations. Now, if you remember thinking back to that screenshot I showed earlier of the help team, you would have noticed it had a nice little help icon, but in this screenshot here, you'll see it's got HW. One of the problems with guests is that you don't see the icons and so on that appear within Teams. You also don't see the profile photos of the people that you're working with. And so that makes it difficult when you're trying to build a collaboration environment for people with low technology literacy to understand where it is. And it also highlights the importance of naming things so that you don't end up with all teams starting with the same 2 letters. We also had spent a bit of time actually working on getting icons and bits and pieces sorted out, and then only to discover that it didn't actually show up in guests, which again, here's the learning curve from my point of view. Should have looked and tried that earlier on in the piece. And there's a few things that we came out of. In fact, the last major one though is that you can't schedule a meeting as a guest. And so this is where our administrators come in. So when they're organising organisation-wide things, one of the administrators will actually create the meeting invitations and send those out. They're generally actually sent as an Outlook invite because we've found that that's the place where people tend to work still. What we would love is we'd love to have the ability to have guests with 2 levels of privilege, because one problem that you have is that all guests have the same privilege. And sometimes you want to have an area where you've got somebody that can contribute content as a guest, but have another set of guests in that same team that can only view it. We'd love that. It's not there. Feedback will be being sent through user voice for that one. Let's talk a wee bit about training. So the training focus for this was very, very simple. Again, we're talking with people with low literacy. We're wanting to bring them up to a standard level where they can work together effectively. And that doesn't mean making them into power users, it means making them into fairly basic users. So we focused on 5 things: the ability to log in, how to navigate, how to work inside a channel, so with a conversation, how to work with documents, and how to do a meeting. So those things were really the things that mattered to them. These people are scattered across a wide geographic region. Having the ability to do a video meeting or with Meet Now is actually a fantastic step forward for them. Having the simple place where they can post a message into a chat and get a response back from their teammates or other colleagues in different organisations, again, that's a real step forward for them. And finally, the document sharing, that's a critical piece of the puzzle. Now, what we did do is for those people that were authoring documents, we gave them a power user session. So we organised the training in 3 phases. Our implementation team, which included some non-technical people, got the initial training, and that was kind of our UAT as well. We then did team leader training. So there's around 20 team leaders or champions that we identified. We trained them all, so we gave them a training session, and then we brought them back for the end user training session. So our implementation team had 3 sessions, our team leaders and champions had 2, and our end users 1 session. We had a training day, so we were very, very lucky. We were able to get 110 of our 150 people in the room at once. So we had a training day, and the training day was a lot of fun. It started off with a bit of an introduction from the Kaimahi leadership team of Monarchy. We then did a 30-minute demo of Teams. And in that demo, we went through all of those activities I spoke about before. We then broke out into groups, small groups of 10 people or less, for 60 minutes, and went through 3 exercises: how to create a meeting, how to do an online meeting, I should say, how to do a chat, and how to do work with documents. So we created a simple worksheet, which is a 2-page document for them to read through with step-by-step on how to do things, and then a set of exercises. And this is where the fun began. So what we discovered was there was a group that had a young woman who was about to get married. And so she decided that their exercise, they were going to do an online wedding organisation. So they went through the whole exercise of creating the invite through a shared document. They set up meetings to work with each other on who should be on the invite list and what the format would be for the wedding ceremony. And then they finally finished off using the chat quite a lot as well. They broke out, they were using phones to do answer messages from phones as well as on laptops, and they had a great time. And I think that was a lot of laughter, which was probably the thing that stood out to me most from it. But at the end, they all absorbed and understood how to use the tool, absorbed the information, understood how to use the tool. We then had a tea break, which is pretty important because we'd covered a lot of ground in this time, and there was a lot of opportunity for people just to have an informal chat. And it was amazing how much conversation went on about, oh, have you tried this, or did you do that? Did you see this? Those kinds of conversations happened in that tea break. And so really important, I think, if you're doing those types of sessions, to have that break afterwards to let people sort of consolidate their thinking or share it with others. We then had a review where we went back through, we went back through some of the key things that we'd learned and a few closing remarks. And then we followed up the following week with a drop-in session and provided training resources for the help team, for the teams as well, to help them through self-help through the Teams help channel. The drop-in session was very interesting because it highlighted something for us. We had a bunch of people that couldn't make it to the training. Most of them actually turned up to this session, to the drop-in session. So the drop-in session we ran 2 of. The first one I attended, the second one was run just by the implementation team themselves, so they didn't actually need my input on the second one. The information that or the sorts of things that we found was we identified potential champions amongst the group. So we picked out the people really quickly who were picking the stuff up fast and running with it. So we grabbed those people and we thought, right, we're going to use you. You're useful for lots of reasons that you don't even know about yet. We also identified people that needed extra help, and there were plenty of those as well. We discovered the 2 demographics, the 25 to 35s and the 50 overs. What we also discovered was that the 50 overs really love animated GIFs. They absolutely jumped on it. Now, I'm noticing this with my own mother when she starts sending me messages on Facebook and using animated GIFs when none of the rest of the family do. And I've figured out now that it's definitely a demographic thing. They seem to be really attracted to it. So all power to them, use it as a tool. It was a great way to drive engagement. We developed an opportunity, we identified an opportunity. Now the opportunity that we identified was around autism. So the Monarchy organisation itself had within it a woman who was a social worker who worked with autistic children. Through conversation at the follow-up session, we discovered another person who was running late. They apologised as they came in because they had to drop their 2 autistic children off to care, which created a conversation, which created a Microsoft team, which was used to create a whole bunch of resources. And those resources are now available to everybody within the Monarchy group. Now that kind of thing wouldn't have happened without the conversation that was going on around the why are we doing this project. And it was a pretty powerful moment in the whole exercise, I think. We also had created new bonds between people, because there's nothing like finding someone you can help to build a bond. And we found lots of cross-generational things going on. We found lots of cross-organisational things going on, but we started building new relationships between people. And what we really did was we created a memorable moment. I think everyone that attended that training has come out of it with something. They understood the technology, they've understood the power of what it can do for them, they've made some friendships, and they've gone away feeling empowered about how they use technology. So the whole project from start to end, 3 months, and during that 3 months time, we started off with our site design, so identifying the teams and the membership. We did the content identification and planning, so working out what content we were going to move, where it was from, identifying whether it was valid or not. We did the teams creation. We onboarded everybody via PowerShell, average of 6 people per team. So we created our pilot group and trained them. We did our administrator training and team leaders. We did our sessions with everyone and then drop-in sessions afterwards. That was, and at the end of that was effectively the end of the major project activities. And then came along our friend COVID-19. Now you may have seen some joke memes floating around the internet about nothing creates digital transformation like COVID-19. Well, here's an example from the stats of the usage of the Monarchy tenant that highlights the point. So you'll see the big leap up. That is March the 21st, which is the day New Zealand went into lockdown. The lockdown announcements started. And you'll see that we've had a massive uptake in the use of Teams through that time. What's really amazed me about this has been the number of the use of Teams has allowed these organisations to carry on working remotely. Before they had this in place, this would have been phone calls, emails, clumsy sharing of documents and so on. But now they've got a tool and a platform and they're really using it. We had some really big successes through the project. So our biggest success was 110 people attending a single user training day. that is a huge percentage of the people that we had available, and considering it was on the 20th of January and a lot of people were still on leave, I think it's just incredible that that number turned up amazing. We have very high engagement levels because everybody understood the problem. They understood that they were trying to solve, and they also understood how this technology was going to do it for them. The solution we came up with was incredibly simple. The Monarchy team themselves are self-sufficient. We can see that because they've created 23 additional teams since we launched without calling for help. They've also been able to migrate their content from their legacy environments, again, without having to call for help. And we were able to deliver this project on time and well under budget. So there was some money left over at the end of this for things that they might like to do, or they can just keep it for something that's valuable to the community. So I'd like to leave you with a call to action. Our communities are full of organisations that are stretched for resource and tight on budget. Us as IT professionals or technology professionals, or whatever we want to call ourselves, have something that we can offer that they need. And a small donation of your time and expertise can make a huge difference and save them a lot of time and money and mistakes. So it can remove risk from those organisations. I would really implore you to look out there into your community for those opportunities, because you'll come out of it feeling great at the end of it. You'll have a good story, you'll make great friendships, and you'll feel like you've made a difference to your own local community. So I've come to the end of my presentation, and I've got some time now for a few questions if anyone's got them. But in the meantime, I'd like you to take a quick look at this slide here. You'll see a website on here called monarchy.health.nz. If you jump onto that website, you'll have a look at the resources and so on that have been built by this community of people to help the community that they work within. And you'll see lots of smiling faces like this one here. So hopefully that's been an enjoyable presentation. I welcome any questions that you have.
Thanks, Steve. I've actually run through the questions that have come up. We've had a few thank yous and hellos to you as well, and feedback of great session. But all the questions have been addressed today so far. I'll just give it another moment to see if anyone wants to quickly type a question in to have it responded to.
Yeah, great. If in the meantime, there's also on my blog, so steveknutson.blog, there is an article on there about the Monarchy project and a whole bunch of free community resources for Teams as well. So if you're interested in using Teams, I'd jump on my website, my blog, you'll find a bunch of resources there, and please use them.
Thank you. One other final comment came in, which was also, what a success story, amazing. Oh, no, wait, now I'm being hit with so many questions. Yeah, but thank you for sharing this story. And then another comment is, this is the type of presentation I'd love to see more of. And to be honest, I was thinking that myself, Steve. It's really great to hear even your feedback on user experience and the generations and the challenge people have, because usually we're talking tech config and other details. One question is, you touched on content types. Did you use them in the document collaboration space?
No, we didn't. There's a very good reason for it. We had small numbers of documents. So what we did was we organized into channels. However, there is possibly going to be a follow-on piece of work with this project where we look at document approval processes, and we may use content types for that. There's still some discussion on where the content's going to end, where that content will live. But that may come around.
Thank you. One other question. How do you handle cultural diversity in teams, especially for global teams? Do you think some kinds of Microsoft technologies are helpful to integrate people from different cultures?
I think there's one really simple thing, and that's making sure that you have that you develop a culture within the people that are working in that environment. So the technology itself can be good or bad. Regardless, it's really the people using it that will make the difference. So one of the things that we did was really around how we named teams. So we made extensive use of Tereo. So we made a lot of use of bilingual content, but we also provided resources that were multicultural, or multi-language. So we have, for example, in Christchurch, we had a horrific tragedy last year with the mosque shootings. There was a lot of support resources developed for children that were affected by that, and we made sure that was available in their native languages. We also have a large Korean community here as well, so there's also Korean resources, Pacific Island languages as well. Yeah, so just I guess we're not using anything smart like translation services or anything. It's really the people producing the content that are making that mark on it, and our branding a little around how we name things.
Thank you. Do you also provide them with a link to the standard Microsoft Learning, or have you steered away from that?
So we provided that to our champion team at the beginning, and the feedback we got was, this is great for us because we're power users. One of the challenges though was, because we were using guests, we found a lot of that stuff wasn't all that relevant for guests. So we made a lot of the content ourselves in their environment to make them familiar with the environment and from the perspective of a guest user.
And one other was, someone actually said they've seen you talk about this previously. I recall you speaking about how you named the teams. Can you share that now?
Yeah, so the team naming was done using basically. So we have different types of teams. So for those teams that were, so we have what we call program teams, and a program team is a group of people from across different the different member organisations working together. And what we actually did was, we found what do they call themselves, right? So we actually went to them and said, what do you call yourselves? And they go, the response we got was, oh, that's Joel's team, or that's Marie's team, or Rachel's team. So what we did was, we actually called the teams Joel's team, Rachel's team, and so on, because that's the language that they use. That's how they call it. So we didn't. We let the masses decide rather than deciding ourselves on that, and that's been, I think, successful. People know where they're working.
Thank you. So that is all the questions that we've just zoomed through. And again, there are some really positive comments as well. Really interesting content, Steve. Thank you so much for taking part in M365 May and for this contribution. It's been a fascinating session. And thank you to everyone who dialed in to listen. And you can finish up if you like with this slide. Fire away.
Yeah. Thank you. This is the sponsor slide. So I'd just like to say thank you for the sponsors. These sorts of events can't happen without great sponsors. I've organised plenty myself, and so thank you to the M365 May team for organising. You guys are rocking it, and also thank you to the sponsors for supporting this type of event. That's really amazing. Thank you.